Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. We're continuing our beginner build video and we are now getting into the light armor classes. I've done 3 for the heavies, 3 for the mediums, and now it is time for the spellcasters of Guild Wars 2 to get their little spotlight. And we're beginning with probably the easiest class in game, maybe one of the easiest I should say, this being the Necromancer. With a extremely high health pool, also a second health bar in the form of Life Force and Death Shroud. The Necromancer is a great time for anyone who wants to ease into the game and experience some cool necromantic dark magic abilities. For the gear set with this build, it's focusing on berserker stats, straight up strike damage power builds. Superior rune is the superior rune of the eagle, increasing my precision and ferocity and dealing 10% increased strike damage to foes that have less than 50% health. As for my weapons, I'm running with axe and focus, and also dagger warhorn in the other weapon set. As for my accessories, this is where you can play around, and I've decided to input Valkyrie stat to give myself a little bit extra vitality. So power, vitality, and ferocity. Especially with your life force, your second health bar, scaling based off of your vitality, it's somewhat important to invest in extra vitality for the Necromancer. Not always, but it can be. Now let's talk about the specs. For my specializations, I'm running with Death Magic, Spite, and Soul Reaping. Death Magic is your trait line where I'm really leaning into the minions and the AI henchman aspect of the Necromancer. It's also cool because it increases your toughness and your survivability. So I'm taking Flesh of the Master, Necromantic Corruption, and Death Nova. Death Nova allowing me to generate more minions on each kill, so I can always have some extra minions rolling. Next for Spite, this is where you're going into more of your strike damage, taking Spiteful Talisman, Awaken the Pain, and also Close to Death. All of these increasing my strike damage, Awaken the Pain transforming Might into more of a straight power boon rather than condition damage, and then Close to Death plus 20%. I'm also taking Rune of the Eagle, which is an additional 10% when I'm fighting foes below 50% health. Next and finally, Soul Reaping. This is for your general profession specialization. This is where I'm taking Unyielding Blast, increasing my damage and vulnerability application on my auto attack for Death Shroud. Vital Persistence, also something to increase my vitality and also sustain, increasing incoming healing from allies, just in case I am in a bit of a pickle, but most of the time it's not. If you want to go for just straight up damage, I would recommend taking Soul Barbs. And finally, I'm taking Death Perception. This is 15% and then 10% critical strike chance. All of this adds up to increase your overall damage and getting more effective and powerful critical hits. As for my utilities, I'm taking Summon Blood Fiend, Summon Bone Minions, Summon Shadow Fiend, and Summon Flesh Golem. All of these minions kind of tie into my Death's Carapace mechanic in Death Magic, further increasing my toughness, allowing my minions to deal more damage with the traits that I am taking, and overall just help swarm the enemy so that I can have an easier time in combat. I am taking another ability, the Well of Darkness. This is extra damage, but importantly, it's also blind application and chill. This well is a little cracked at the moment, I would say. It's a little powerful. It does quite a lot of damage, and the blind and the chill are extremely effective. This used to just blind, but they've really buffed it up. So this is very useful in open world and even in competitive modes as well. So let's head on over and fight our lovely Risen Giants. Considering how many enemies that we have, we can probably pull this Abomination as well, just to show off some of the use of blind. Because even if an enemy is unstoppable, you do get the application of blind to prevent them from striking you. So it can be very useful. With this build, I'm kind of playing at mid-range, with the axe and the focus allowing me to do extra vulnerability application, faster packets of damage. We have an AoE skill on the third ability and then the offhand focus, giving me some life leech if I need it, but also additional vulnerability, and the final skill, dealing more damage if enemies have boons. In the open world, I will say that you don't always run into enemies that have boons on them, or that they don't apply boons as frequently as I would maybe like, but in certain situations, it can be useful and be like, oh yeah, that enemy has some boons, let me go and just destroy them, and the more boons you destroy, the more damage you're getting out of this ability. In my dagger and warhorn, this is where you can get some extra self-sustain if you happen to be in a situation where that is needed. You also get a nice immobilize on your third ability, which does some pretty nice damage. Definitely a lot more damage than like a Scepter 3 or Guardian, but it's pretty powerful. The warhorn for some extra life leech as well, also application of swiftness to get around, and the fourth ability to inflict some extra fear. That fear might be pretty useful in certain situations to just control enemies. It also does extra defiance damage, which is pretty nice. The shroud, I mean, it's mostly survivability and sustain, but your auto attack can be pretty useful. It's not all too bad, especially if you can cleave multiple enemies in a line. You can do a lot of damage with this. But with this build, I would say that your Death Shroud is mostly for your self-sustain. If you want to have an extra / easier time and not really have to worry about a profession mechanic, you can just play with your weapons. It's perfectly fine, it's perfectly effective, and you do quite a bit of damage anyways. So I would go and fight another giant just because, like, we gotta really highlight this, just because I feel like with Necromancer, you have so much self-sustain, and with this build, you have so much survivability to the point where it's like, I feel like we have to go and fight champions, not just veterans. We really gotta push this build to the limit. Also, with your minions, they each have their own active abilities. With the 2 bone minions, I oftentimes don't use this skill, just because it does destroy one of the minions, but if you want to, it is a nice packet of damage, and of course creating a poison nova because it is traded. But with the ability of summon your bone minions, they don't resummon themselves, so if you want to resummon 2 of them again, you have to then destroy the final one. But when it comes to the Bone Fiend, and not the Bone Fiend, I'm sorry, the Shadow Fiend and also the Golem, you can use those abilities pretty much off cooldown, just because it's some extra damage and some extra conditions with like crowd control and also blind, chill, and weakness, which is pretty useful. I wish we could have just like soloed that, but we had some people come in, so I'm having a difficult time showing off a more intense situation with this build, because Necromancer is already notorious for being easy and being very sustainable. So with this build, incorporating more vitality and also strike damage, and having all of your minions kind of do the bulk of the work for you and maintaining that damage, I find it a little bit difficult showing it off here in Ore, but I want to stay in Ore because it's the most difficult, high-end, free-to-play zone. But I guess that's the beauty of a beginner build, is that this one in particular I find to be extremely easy. Also, I do play a lot of Necromancer, so I know what I'm doing for the most part. And it's so simple. I'm barely ever dropping below 75% health. The enemies don't even have time to kind of target onto me, just because you send in your minions and they do the bulk of the work for you. You just gotta kind of exist for the most part, and that's really fun. But I really recommend this build if you are a Necromancer. Doing something with strike damage. You could also do a more conditioned damage slanted version with your scepter and your staff. That, everyone, I would say is my beginner build for the Necromancer. I really wish that I could have fought like a couple champions just to really test this, because Necromancer is so bulky, it's so healthy, and you have another health bar to rely on as well, to the point where it's like, come on, bring on the champion, let's fight. But thank you all so much for coming on by. Like the video if you liked it. Comment down below any tips that you have for any new players that are maybe trying out Necromancer. This is the place to share info and play around and all that stuff. So thank you all so much for coming on by. If you'd like to support the channel, head on over to the Patreon to get early access to all of my videos. If you would like to hop on over to Twitch, I stream there every day of the week. And if you're interested in trying Guild Wars 2, I have links down below as well. Thank you all so very much, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye everyone. Mwah.